In this video, we will be building a responsive testimonial slider using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You'll be able to toggle between testimonials along with making it responsive to a phone, to a tablet, and for desktop. We're going to go ahead and get started in Visual Studio Code. How I've broken up my project folder is using 6 files, 3 files for the sandbox environment where we're going to build out our HTML, build out our CSS, and build out our JavaScript. And then we have the exact same structure for the final solution. This solution is going to be available in my GitHub, so be sure to take a look at the description below to get access to that link. I do want to mention that this video will be broken up into 3 parts. It's intended for beginners, so it will go more comprehensive and in-depth for explaining how HTML works, how CSS works, and how JavaScript works. So if that's what you're interested in, stay tuned and continue watching for more instruction. Now, to get started, we can go ahead and click Shift !Tab. For this tutorial, I'm using a Mac, so all the instructions are going to be according for that, but Windows should be pretty similar to the same idea. So Shift !Tab to get boilerplate. And I'd like to go ahead and explain what all of this means. So first, let's go ahead and add testimonial slider, just to make sure we're on the same page here for the title, testimonial slider. Now, HTML is essentially a collection of tags. So HTML you use to structure projects, websites, anything you're working on, and you're using tags. Tags come in all different shapes and sizes. Most of the tags will come in with an opening tag and a closing tag, and it's used to wrap content or information data you want to put in the browser or put behind the scenes. Now, there's 2 parts to HTML. You've got the head and you've got the body. You've got the head, which is all that information behind the scenes, meta details, to give you more context and details about the project for SEO, overall just benefits that underlie the project you're working on. Then you have body, which is the content generally of what you see in the browser. So those are the 2 types. You have the tag up front. This is essentially telling the document that this is HTML5, and that's all you really need to know about that. We're using HTML5, and that's always going to be there for boilerplate. You've got HTML opening and closing tags to wrap all of the elements that we're going to be building out. So that is essentially the wrapper for everything that we're going to be working on, and then the 2 sections like I mentioned, head and body. Within the head, it's all the meta details, all the things you can't necessarily see, with some exceptions, but for the most part it's underneath. And I wanted to explain these really quick. So meta char set equals UTF-8. For one, you have the name of the tag, and then you have attributes. Tags can contain attributes, and you're going to see those here in this lighter blue. Char set UTF-8 is essentially the encoding, the interpreter of all of the data that we're going to be putting in the browser. It's allowing the browser to be able to process this effectively, and so that's what we're putting here. This meta tag with the name of viewport is how the phone or the device that you're using can interpret the content. And so we're saying the viewport, specifically we're talking about the viewport, what can be seen in this window like so. We want it to be the width, device width. So, for different devices, it can be different sizes, and we're specifying that we want that to adjust based on whether someone's using a phone, tablet, or desktop. Later on with CSS, we will add media queries to add responsiveness and adjust elements accordingly to the device width. But in terms of, getting started, we're just specifying this content attribute now. Lastly, we have initial scale of 1. That's just essentially saying we're not going to be zooming in at all. It's just the default. Start at the default view, which is never zoomed. So that is just the boilerplate. We've added the title. That title is going to be seen for SEO, the title tag in the tab above, but also in a search result, that that title that you see before you click on a link. And then you can also that comes in conjunction with a meta description, and that's what you're seeing there. Now, we can go ahead and start building out our project in the body. That's where things are going to go. Before we do so, we actually want to link to our CSS and JavaScript. So to maintain control of your project, maintain, your sense of sanity, you can say. You want to ideally, most of the time, majority of the time, you want to separate out your, what you're typing out. So you want to put styles in your CSS. You want to put the interactivity that you're adding. That's going to be that toggle between the testimonials in the JavaScript. And so we put that in separate files not to get too messy. And so we want to add the CSS in the head, and we're going to add the JavaScript to the body, and I'll explain that in just a moment too. So we can go ahead and start with the link tag. That's going to be specific to adding CSS. We're going to say link with an href of sandbox.css, and then we're going to say link with an attribute of rel, and we're going to put style sheet. Rel stands for the relationship. What is the relationship of this external sheet? Well, it's a style sheet, and that's what we're specifying here. And href is the attribute used to get the referenced location of the CSS file. So that's what we're specifying here. Now for scripts, for JavaScript, it's a bit different. We're going to use what's called a script tag, and we're going to just give it a source. Where's the source? It's going to be sandbox.js. You can instead add in JavaScript directly within the tags to HTML. But in this case, it's really one or the other. You can either do external or internal within one set of opening and closing script tags. General recommendation is going to always put it in an external sheet for your sanity. So we've added that. Now we can go ahead and start adding the HTML, the specific HTML to structure this project. So structure is extremely important. It sets up the rest of your project if you're building out. So, it's going to be helpful for later developers who are working on your code or anything. So you really want to make sure that it's organized, it makes sense logically. You've, thought about, the best way to do it. And you've also, gone back and reiterated to try to maybe improve it in the future. And after you've at least get something working, oftentimes programmers might just get something working, functional, and then they'll go back and refactor and work on revising it, making it cleaner. And so that's what we're going to be, doing today. We're going to be making it as concise and clean as we can. So we can get started. And to get started, we're going to be using div tags, lots of div tags to organize and structure our testimonial slider. Now, with div tags, they are essentially a tag that has less semantic meaning as other more specific tags. And semantic meaning is just, tags with more specificity, such as the header tag, the footer tag, the nav tag. Those all give context about what's the purpose of this, wrapper. Div doesn't have that, and so that's why we're going to go ahead and give it a class. We mentioned that HTML elements can have attributes, and one of those is a class. It allows us to, style later on with CSS these different elements to make it look more like a testimonial slider. And so that's what we're doing today. We're going to give these class names a bit more context about what we're actually working on. So we're going to say testimonial container for the first one, and then we're going to work our way inward. So we've got the container, we've got the window, we've got the container. Within the container, we have the image, within the container, we have the card, which is here. We have the card, and then we have the controls. That's going to make up the container. Within the card, we have the image and the content. And then within the content, we have two separate divs that are going to break up this top part and this bottom part. And this bottom part is going to be just more details specific about, the profile of the cat that we're going to use in this example today. And this is more details about the business and the quote. And so we can go ahead and get started. We're going to start with that container. And as I mentioned, there's two parts to the container. There is the div with the class of card, testimonial card, and I'm specifying testimonial in front and then dash. You can name classes anything you want, but I'm giving, making it consistent so it's clean. So testimonial with dash of card, and then we have div with the class of testimonial controls. And we're working our way inward. Essentially, that's the best way to approach it, or one way to approach it. And as you get better, you can make a judgment call on how you want to approach your HTML. But I find it, especially for beginners, it's good to start slowly working your way inward. Start outwards and work your way inwards. And that's what we're doing now. So we've got the card, we've got the controls. We can start with card first. And within the card, we have the content and the image. So let's go ahead and add that. We can say div with the class of testimonial image. And we can say div with the class of testimonial content, like so. And then we can start adding more specificity. We can actually add the image tag that we're going to be using. So image with an ID of image. I mentioned classes are great for styling. IDs can also be used for styling, but I would generally, more be inclined to use IDs for JavaScript for the interactivity, just because IDs can only be attached to one specific element, and classes can be reused. And so classes are often beneficial for styles because they can be reused and are just better for it. And IDs can be more beneficial for pulling and targeting specific elements to adjust and add interactivity to. And so we're using IDs today for JavaScript, and classes are going to be used for CSS. So we can say ID of image, we can say source images, image 1. We're essentially just grabbing that image from our folder that I've used for our project today, which stores the 3 images. For this HTML we're building out, we will use JavaScript later to toggle between all 3 testimonials, but for just the HTML, we're only putting the 1 testimonial, and that's going to be beneficial for SEO to have some sort of content on the page, and versus just having it blank and then calling it later with JavaScript, adding it later with JavaScript. We want to have some sort of content there to help with the SEO. So we're going to go ahead and images /image1 JPEG. Then we're going to add an alt attribute, and the alt attribute is great for accessibility. So if the image doesn't load, or for screen readers, it's helpful to add a description. Now, building out alt attributes, when you add the value, you want to think about describing what's in the image. So the better the description, the better the alt attribute can be. So that's what we did here. I've just gone ahead and created this description: calm tabby cat sitting comfortably on a cushion, looking up and leaning next to a windowsill. That's the description I used, and it allows you to get a picture of what this image is without having to actually look at it. Great. Now that we've added that image, we can go work on the content. Now within the content, there's 2 divs or 2 containers like I mentioned. There's the div that's just a regular div with no class, and then there's going to be you've got the business name div with a class of business name and ID of business, and then we can call it Gato Gourmet Delights. And then we've got the paragraph with a class of quote and ID of quote. And we can grab this. So Gato Gourmet Delights, we can grab the paragraph or the quote here, and we're going to just paste that in. We've got the quote, and now we can add, we have the business name, the quote. Now we can add the other div, and this is going to be class testimonial profile. This is going to be a bit more about the cat specifically, and we're going to say div with a class of name, ID of name, and we called him Whiskers Meow. And then we've got a div class of role, ID of role, and chief food taster. And so that's our testimonial profile. Now that we've added that, we can go ahead and move over to testimonial controls. Within the controls, we're using 2 buttons for this project. We're using a button with an ID of PREV, previous, and then if you hit Control Command Space, type for angle, and then grab, it's going to be this option here, this big one. We're going to add this arrow, We're going to do that again. Button ID of next. Control Command Space, angle, and we'll grab it again here. And if you don't have that, if you're using Windows, you can go ahead and just pull that from, copy and paste that from the GitHub repository that I'm going to be adding. So that's going to be there. We've added the button. Now we've added the script, and let's just confirm that should be everything. Okay. And we can compare it just to make sure we're not missing anything. We've got the container, the card, the image, the business, the quote, profile. Great. And so that is part one. That is just the HTML. We're using structure to structure this card, and you'll see in the browser it's going to look blown up. The image is massive, the text is there. It's just very difficult to see, and so we're going to use CSS to start adding that styles, and then JavaScript's going to be that interactivity. So that's it. We've used divs for containers. We've used more specific HTML elements for for images and for paragraphs when it makes sense, and we've just used divs in this context since we aren't creating like a blog, for instance, with an article that uses section tags and paragraphs and headings, where since we don't have those available options for a testimonial slider, we want to use divs to give that meaning with classes, and that's what we're doing today. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks so much.